Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the fascinating, hidden psychology of why some of us literally need chaos just to get things done. I mean, if you've ever felt completely misunderstood by standard productivity advice, or if you constantly find yourself pulling off miracles right at the edge of a deadline while everyone else is losing their minds, well, you're in exactly the right place. Standard advice usually just tells you to, buy a fancier planner or download another time tracking app, but that totally misses the point. Today, we're unpacking the actual science behind your mind's unique wiring. So let's look at this deeply relatable paradox. Have you ever noticed that you only feel truly dialed in when the world around you is loud, busy, or even just a little bit messy? It's a genuine mystery for so many people. Why is it that staring at a blank wall in a completely silent room leaves you totally paralyzed, unable to start a single task, yet a noisy, chaotic environment makes you incredibly productive? Just think about this stark contrast. It's reality for so many of us. While some people need absolute stillness and a perfectly organized, minimalist desk to do their best work, others find that a messy environment, external pressure, and a seemingly impossible 2-hour deadline are exactly what they need to finally unlock their deepest focus. For some, a quiet room is a sanctuary, but for you, it might feel like a mental prison, and you vastly prefer that high-stakes, chaotic scenario to actually get moving. Now, society loves to label this preference for chaos as a poor work ethic or just plain laziness. We're constantly told we just need more discipline, right? But psychology tells a completely different story about your brain's internal logic. This isn't a flaw in your character at all. Actually, it's a brilliant, hidden adaptation. Your brain hasn't failed to learn discipline. It's simply learned how to use high stimulation to function at its peak and survive in a really complex world. To really get this, we have to completely reframe the experience. We're shifting the whole narrative from a perceived character flaw to a pretty remarkable survival mechanism. It's a concept psychologists refer to as a trauma-related adaptation, or what's often powerfully described as traumatic intelligence. And once you grasp this, you start to realize exactly why all those typical productivity hacks never stood a chance. Let's break down what this actually means for your daily life. The actual definition of traumatic intelligence explains so much of this behavior. If you grew up in an environment that was unpredictable, loud, or maybe emotionally tense, your nervous system basically adapted to survive. It learned to stay highly alert and ready for absolutely anything. So your brain literally practiced over and over again, responding to high-pressure situations until that heightened state of awareness just became its natural everyday baseline. And because your brain operates with this highly active baseline, it's constantly scanning for changes. But here is the absolute most fascinating part of all this. When a crisis hits, while most other people naturally start to panic, your external environment is finally just matching the highly active baseline your brain is already perfectly comfortable with. Since your mind has basically rehearsed for disaster for years, the external chaos doesn't overwhelm you at all. Actually, it regulates you. You suddenly become calm, clear-headed, and intensely focused. But there's a catch. This incredible protective adaptation creates a really strange paradox when you try to sit down and work in a standard traditional office. We call this the silence trap. When distractions disappear and everything around you is perfectly still, your brain doesn't just naturally relax. It honestly doesn't know how to just turn off, which leads to a very specific and usually frustrating set of reactions. You can clearly see the difference between these two operating systems here. For a standard brain, a perfectly quiet room means relaxation and focus. The silence is soothing. But for a chaos-adapted brain, that same silence triggers hypervigilance and restlessness. Because you're so used to scanning for changes and predicting problems, your brain treats the lack of stimulation as a reason to stay on guard. It basically assumes a threat is hiding in the quiet. But throw a sudden crisis or a messy workspace at these two brains, and their reactions entirely flip. So why does this happen? It all comes down to what psychology calls the stimulation threshold. Without external noise to hit that threshold and soak up a big chunk of your attention, your internal thoughts, replaying old conversations, analyzing past interactions, or worrying about the future, suddenly become incredibly loud and deafening. Paradoxically, physical silence is actually incredibly noisy inside your head. And this is exactly why external chaos acts as a sensory buffer. When you head to a busy coffee shop with people talking and espresso machines whirring, or when you blast loud music in your headphones, you aren't actually distracting yourself. You're purposefully giving your brain the sensory buffer it desperately needs. You're essentially drowning out your own internal mental chatter so you can finally direct your actual focus toward the task in front of you. Okay, so let's move to how this builds into the way you actually execute tasks. We've talked about focus, but what about motivation? How does this unique wiring affect your ability to actually start a project in the first place? Well, for a mind wired this way, standard motivational advice, like visualizing your goals or making a neat little 5 year plan, simply falls flat. So, how on earth do you actually start? It turns out setting abstract goals and waiting for a magical burst of emotional inspiration just doesn't work for you. If a deadline is far away, there's no immediate consequence. Your mind treats time like an unlimited resource and easily postpones the work, no matter how important it is. But the moment you introduce an imminent consequence or a sudden crisis, the ultimate motivator gets unlocked: urgency. This triggers a very specific and honestly pretty exciting biological sequence. A looming deadline approaches or a sudden emergency strikes. Instantly, your brain gets a massive rush of adrenaline. That adrenaline creates an immediate behavioral command in your body. It forces you into high-octane action, completely bypassing all of that frustrating mental friction and procrastination that usually keeps you stuck. It's essentially a biological override switch that forces you into gear. So, far from being disorganized or messy, operating this way actually reveals some incredibly advanced cognitive skills. If this is how you work, you really shouldn't view it as a detriment. You're likely using mental muscles that standard, quiet environments rarely ever test, but which are incredibly valuable in complex, fast-moving situations. You're just processing the world at a totally different speed. Think about it. Spending years adjusting to shifting, unpredictable environments naturally builds extreme cognitive flexibility. You develop highly advanced pattern recognition. You learn to carve your own path through problems rather than relying on standard, rigid, step-by-step procedures. Your mind is rapidly sorting through a complex landscape of data, spotting subtle inconsistencies and emerging patterns that others completely miss. This allows for incredibly fast, non-standard problem solving. It's honestly a superpower. Understanding this hidden psychology, the traumatic intelligence, the stimulation threshold, the urgency motivator, is the absolute first critical step in completely changing how you view your own productivity. You have to stop evaluating yourself using metrics that were designed for a completely different type of brain. Seriously, it's time to let go of the guilt. It's time for a massive perspective shift. Working best right in the middle of chaos does not mean you're broken, lazy, or undisciplined. No. It simply means your mind has adapted to navigate the world through movement, pressure, and high engagement. You aren't falling behind. You are pressure tested. You thrive in the exact environments where everyone else tends to freeze. The ultimate takeaway from all this is simple. Stop feeling guilty for needing noise, pressure, and a bit of a mess to get things done. Accept it as the natural, brilliant adaptation that it is. When you stop fighting your need for stimulation, you can finally start intentionally designing your life, your schedule, and your environment around how your mind actually works, rather than exhausting yourself fighting against it every single day. So I'll leave you with this question to really chew on. Knowing that your brain's need for chaos is actually a brilliant, hard-won adaptation, how will you redesign your workspace and your habits to finally work with your mind today? Are you going to embrace that coffee shop noise or let those tight deadlines work to your advantage? If you love uncovering the hidden psychology behind human behavior, make sure to subscribe to this explainer so you can keep understanding yourself and the fascinating people around you even better.